Before Columbus set foot in the Americas, there was a city larger than London. A city with massive pyramids, tens of thousands of people, and a culture so advanced it should be famous today. But instead, history buried it. This was Cahokia, the civilization America tried to erase. 1,000 years ago, the land along the Mississippi River looked very different from today. No highways, no modern cities, and no towering steel bridges stretched across the water. Instead, this fertile valley was a wide, green expanse of forests, rivers, and open land. It was here, around the year 1050, that something remarkable began to take shape. A city that would grow to become larger than London or Paris, yet one that most people have never heard of. This city was Cahokia. Cahokia's story begins with its location. The site lay just east of today's St. Louis, Missouri, in an area where the Mississippi River met smaller waterways. This natural crossroads gave Cahokia access to rich farmland, plentiful game, and, most importantly, trade routes that stretched across the continent. For people living in scattered villages throughout the region, Cahokia offered something powerful: opportunity. Families migrated to the growing settlement, bringing their skills, traditions, and hopes for a better life. Over a few short decades, the population swelled. By 1050, Cahokia had transformed from a modest village into the largest city north of Mexico. But Cahokia was not just big, it was planned. Archaeologists have found that the city was laid out with precision. Massive earthen pyramids, called mounds, rose above the flat landscape, connected by wide plazas that served as gathering spaces. Homes were built in organized rows, neighborhoods carefully arranged around public areas. Unlike many villages of the time, Cahokia was not simply a cluster of houses. It was a city with structure and vision. Its leaders oversaw construction on a massive scale, and their projects reflected ambition unlike anything else in North America at the time. The most impressive of these constructions was Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in the Americas. Even in its earliest phases, this colossal pyramid dominated the skyline. Over time, it grew to more than 100 feet tall and covered an area larger than the base of Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. Building such a structure required millions of baskets of earth carried by hand, a staggering feat of labor and organization. At the top of Monk's Mound stood what is believed to have been the home or temple of Cahokia's rulers, a symbol of power and authority visible for miles around. Cahokia's rise was not just about monuments, though. It was fueled by agriculture. The people of Cahokia mastered the cultivation of corn, which became the backbone of their food supply. With corn farming, the city could sustain its swelling population and free up workers for other tasks. Surpluses of food allowed trade to flourish. Artifacts found at Cahokia show connections stretching far beyond the Mississippi Valley. Copper from the Great Lakes, seashells from the Gulf of Mexico, and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains all made their way into Cahokia. This was not an isolated community. It was a hub in a vast network that linked distant peoples and cultures. Religion and ceremony also played a central role in the city's rise. The mounds and plazas were not just practical structures, they were sacred spaces. Some were aligned with the movements of the sun and stars, suggesting that Cahokia's leaders tracked celestial events to guide planting, harvests, and rituals. Wooden posts arranged in a circle, sometimes called wood hinges, acted as calendars, marking solstices and equinoxes. These alignments reveal a society deeply connected to the cosmos, blending the spiritual with the political in ways that reinforced the authority of the city's leaders. The rise of Cahokia was also marked by social transformation. With so many people gathered in one place, new forms of leadership and organization became necessary. Archaeological evidence points to a stratified society, with elites living in larger, more decorated homes near the central plazas, while ordinary citizens lived in smaller dwellings on the outskirts. At the top of the hierarchy were the rulers, who claimed both political and spiritual power. They were seen not just as chiefs, but as intermediaries between the people and the gods. Their authority was reinforced by ceremonies, feasts, and public rituals held in the shadow of the great mounds. Yet, even with this hierarchy, life in Cahokia was dynamic and diverse. The city attracted people from different backgrounds, and this mix brought new ideas, new traditions, and new energy. Archaeologists studying burial sites have found remains of individuals who likely came from faraway regions, suggesting that Cahokia was a magnet for migration. This diversity helped fuel its rapid growth, making it unlike any other settlement in North America. The sheer scale of Cahokia at its height is difficult to overstate. By some estimates, the city's population reached between 20,000 and 30,000 people. That made it larger than many European capitals of the same period. Paris, the pride of medieval France, had around 25,000 residents in the 12th century. London, too, was no bigger than Cahokia at the time. Yet while Paris and London grew into centers of global influence, Cahokia would vanish into obscurity, its legacy nearly erased from memory. But in these early years, during its rise, Cahokia stood as a beacon of possibility. It showed what indigenous people of North America were capable of building long before European contact. It was proof of vision, organization, and ambition on a scale that rivaled civilizations across the world. To those who lived there, Cahokia must have felt eternal, a city destined to stand forever as the heart of a great civilization. And yet, as we move forward, the story takes a turn. For while Cahokia rose swiftly, its golden age would shine only briefly before shadows began to gather. The very power that fueled its rise would also plant the seeds of its decline. By the middle of the 12th century, Cahokia stood as the beating heart of North America. Its rapid rise had transformed it from a small settlement into the largest city north of Mexico. But now, in its golden age, Cahokia became something even more extraordinary. The city stretched across 6 square miles of land, filled with broad plazas, neatly arranged neighborhoods, and more than 100 earthen mounds. From above, it would have looked like a great tapestry of order and ambition, a city planned with care and pulsing with life. At the center of it all loomed Monk's Mound, the grandest of Cahokia's structures and the physical symbol of its power. Standing more than 100 feet tall and covering an area larger than 14 football fields, it dwarfed everything else in sight. Climbing to its summit meant ascending the equivalent of 10 modern stories, and once at the top, one could gaze out across a city that seemed limitless. At its peak, Cahokia's population may have reached as many as 30,000 people, more than double the size of contemporary London. To stand at the top of Monk's Mound during this era was to stand in the capital of a thriving civilization. Life in Cahokia during its golden age revolved around both order and spectacle. The city's plazas were vast open spaces that acted as stages for rituals, feasts, and ceremonies. Thousands of people could gather in these squares to watch processions led by priests and leaders dressed in elaborate regalia. These public rituals reinforced the authority of Cahokia's elite, reminding everyone that their leaders were not simply rulers, but intermediaries between the people and the divine. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of Cahokia's golden age. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of wooden structures aligned with the sun's movements, sometimes called woodhenges. These were essentially giant solar calendars, used to mark solstices and equinoxes. When the sun rose or set in perfect alignment with the posts, it signaled the time for planting, harvest, or ceremonial rituals. Such astronomical precision tied the rhythms of daily life to the heavens, embedding religion and cosmology into the very fabric of the city. Agriculture sustained this massive urban experiment. Corn was the foundation, but Cahokia's people also grew squash, beans, and sunflowers, which provided a balanced diet. Farmers cultivated fields outside the city, their labor ensuring steady food supplies that could support such a large population. Surpluses of food enabled the city's elites to organize massive feasts, where whole communities gathered to eat, drink, and celebrate under the gaze of the towering mounds. These feasts weren't just meals. They were displays of wealth and power, tools for uniting the population and maintaining social order. Trade networks reached even further during Cahokia's Golden Age, stretching across thousands of miles. Archaeologists have found copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, and obsidian from as far away as the Rocky Mountains. These items were not just practical goods. They were symbols of connection, proof that Cahokia stood at the crossroads of a vast exchange network. Traders and travelers moved in and out of the city, carrying stories, traditions, and goods from far-off lands, making Cahokia one of the most cosmopolitan places in pre-Columbian America. Daily life in Cahokia was complex and varied. The city was not made up of elites alone. Ordinary families lived in smaller wooden homes clustered together in neighborhoods. These homes were simple but functional, built with wooden frames and thatched roofs. Families cooked over open fires, crafted tools, and tended gardens. Children played in the plazas while artisans shaped stone, bone, and shell into tools, ornaments, and religious objects. For most, life was a balance of farming, family, and faith, yet all lived in the shadow of the great mounds, constantly reminded of the hierarchy that defined their world. That hierarchy was stark. The ruling elite lived in larger, more elaborate homes, often near the central plazas. Their lives were marked by privilege and authority, with access to exotic goods, ceremonial power, and control over the labor of thousands. The contrast between rich and poor was visible in burials, too. Archaeologists have uncovered graves filled with treasures, copper ornaments, shell beads, and finely crafted tools, alongside the bodies of high-ranking individuals. Some burials even contain evidence of human sacrifices, likely intended to accompany the dead into the afterlife, a chilling reminder of the power wielded by Cahokia's leaders. Sport also played a role in Cahokia's Golden Age. The people played a game similar to modern lacrosse, often held in the city's large plazas. These matches were more than entertainment. They were events tied to ritual and community identity. The energy of these games, combined with feasts and festivals, helped strengthen bonds among Cahokia's diverse population. For a city as large and complex as Cahokia, such traditions were crucial in maintaining unity. Yet, for all its order and splendor, Cahokia was not without its tensions. The very size that made it powerful also made it fragile. Supporting tens of thousands of people required constant effort, steady food supplies, stable leadership, and careful balance between competing groups. Archaeological evidence suggests that violence and social unrest may have been part of life in Cahokia even during its height. Defensive palisades, or wooden walls, were built around parts of the city, hinting that conflict, whether from outside enemies or internal strife, was never far away. Still, for nearly 200 years, Cahokia thrived. It was a place of ambition and innovation, where religion, politics, and daily life blended into something greater than the sum of its parts. It was a city that rivaled the great capitals of Europe in size and complexity, yet unlike London or Paris, it rose in the heart of what many once believed was untouched wilderness. Cahokia proved that this land was never empty, never waiting to be discovered. It was already home to a civilization of astonishing scale. But golden ages never last forever. The very forces that allowed Cahokia to shine so brightly, its population, its agriculture, its ambitious leadership, also set the stage for cracks to form. Overuse of resources, growing social tensions, and environmental pressures loomed on the horizon. For all its grandeur, Cahokia's Golden Age carried within it the seeds of its eventual collapse. And that collapse, when it came, would be sudden, dramatic, and mysterious, leaving behind questions that echo to this day. When we imagine ancient civilizations, it's often their rulers, monuments, or wars that dominate the story. But the true heartbeat of a city lies in its people, the farmers, artisans, traders, and families whose daily lives made civilization possible. Cahokia, at its height, was not only a city of great mounds and powerful leaders, it was also home to tens of thousands of ordinary men, women, and children. Their routines, struggles, and traditions shaped the life of North America's largest pre-Columbian city. Walking into Cahokia during its golden years would have been a sensory overload. The city stretched as far as the eye could see, with neighborhoods organized around open plazas. Smoke curled into the air from countless cooking fires. Wooden houses, simple but sturdy, lined the streets in rows. Chickens and pigs were nowhere to be found. Those animals had not yet reached the continent. Instead, people tended small gardens filled with beans, squash, and corn, the staples of Cahokia's diet. Children chased each other between houses, their laughter mixing with the rhythmic pounding of stone tools against wood as artisans shaped new objects. Dogs barked in the distance. They were one of the only domesticated animals in Cahokia and served as companions and helpers. A Cahokian house was a modest but efficient structure, built from wooden poles set into the ground. Its walls were covered with woven mats and plastered with mud to keep out wind and rain. The roofs were thatched with grass, and inside, a single family lived together in close quarters. The home's central hearth provided warmth, light, and a place to cook meals. Around the hearth, families shared stories, crafted tools, and passed down traditions. At night, the glow of countless fires across the city would have cast a warm orange light over Cahokia, a reminder that while grand ceremonies filled the plazas, most of life was lived in the quiet rhythm of family and work. Food defined Cahokian life as much as anything else. Corn was king, the foundation of the diet. Farmers worked tirelessly in fields outside the city, ensuring that enough maize was harvested to feed tens of thousands of mouths. But corn alone was not enough. Beans and squash grew alongside it, creating the Three Sisters system of farming. These crops complemented each other in both the soil and the diet, offering a balance of nutrients that supported healthy growth. Sunflowers were also cultivated, valued for their oil-rich seeds. Hunting and fishing supplemented these crops. Men ventured into forests and rivers, bringing back deer, turkeys, and fish that added protein to the diet. Seasonal berries, nuts, and wild plants rounded out meals. For ordinary families, food was both sustenance and culture, deeply tied to the cycles of nature and the rituals of the city. Artisans formed another vital part of daily life. Skilled hands shaped stone, bone, and shell into tools, weapons, and ornaments. Pottery was common, used for cooking, storage, and ceremony. Some artisans specialized in creating intricate figurines or symbolic objects tied to religion. Others worked copper into ornaments or mica into reflective sheets, materials that arrived through the city's vast trade networks. For these craftsmen and craftswomen, their work was more than practical. It was a way of embedding meaning into daily life. Every bowl, every blade, every bead carried with it a story of use, exchange, or ritual. The rhythm of life was also marked by work beyond farming and crafting. Construction projects were constant in Cahokia. The city's leaders demanded labor for the building of mounds, palisades, and public spaces. Ordinary people likely contributed through a system similar to communal labor, gathering in large groups to move basket after basket of earth. It was backbreaking work, but it bound the community together. Each new mound or plaza was not just a structure. It was a symbol of collective effort, proof that Cahokia's people were capable of extraordinary feats when united under shared purpose. Children in Cahokia grew up surrounded by this dynamic world. From an early age, they learned the skills of their families, farming, crafting, or trading. Games were a central part of childhood, but they weren't only for fun. Some games prepared children for adult life, teaching coordination, teamwork, or even spiritual lessons. One of the most popular games resembled modern lacrosse, played by adults and children alike. Matches were often tied to ritual, with games unfolding in the plazas as spectators cheered, placing bets on the outcome or interpreting the results as signs from the gods. These contests weren't just recreation. They were woven into the fabric of Cahokian society. Religion, too, permeated daily life in ways both subtle and profound. Families prayed at household shrines, leaving offerings of food or crafted objects. Larger ceremonies pulled people into the city's plazas, where priests led rituals timed to the movements of the sun or moon. Music filled the air, drums, rattles, and chants echoing through the city, calling people to focus on the sacred. For ordinary Cahokians, faith was not separate from daily routine. It guided planting, harvest, healing, and even conflict. The alignment of their world with the cosmos gave meaning to everything from the smallest meal to the grandest feast. Festivals provided moments of release and unity. During these events, the city came alive with color and energy. People gathered by the thousands, sharing food and drink in massive feasts. Traders displayed exotic goods from distant lands, while dancers in elaborate costumes performed rituals meant to honor the gods and ancestors. The atmosphere was charged with excitement, but also with purpose. Festivals reinforced social bonds, connected the community to their leaders, and reminded everyone of their shared identity as Cahokians. In a city of such size and diversity, these moments were crucial for maintaining unity. But daily life was not equal for all. Social divisions were sharp and visible. The ruling elite lived near the center of the city, in larger homes with access to exotic goods. Their lives were marked by ceremony and privilege. Archaeological evidence from burials reveals that elites were laid to rest with copper ornaments, shells, and finely crafted tools. Some were even accompanied by human sacrifices, individuals who may have been servants, prisoners, or followers chosen to join their leaders in death. For the elites, death was not an end but a passage into a new world, carried out with rituals that reinforced their divine authority. Ordinary citizens, by contrast, were buried with few possessions, a reminder of the stark inequalities that defined life in Cahokia. Women played an essential role in Cahokia's society. They were farmers, artisans, and caretakers, but also spiritual figures and leaders within their communities. The cultivation of corn and other crops often fell to women, making them central to the city's survival. Some evidence even suggests that women may have held positions of religious or political influence, though the details remain debated among scholars. In either case, their labor and knowledge sustained the rhythms of life and anchored Cahokia's rise as a city. Cahokia's population was diverse, a melting pot of peoples from across the continent. Archaeologists studying skeletal remains have found evidence that many residents were born far from the Mississippi Valley. They may have been drawn to Cahokia by its promise of prosperity, its religious significance, or its role as a trade hub. This diversity enriched the city, bringing new ideas, traditions, and skills. But it may also have created tensions, as groups with different backgrounds sought to balance their identities within the larger community. In every corner of Cahokia, life carried a rhythm of work, worship, and wonder. The people of the city did not see themselves as living in a lost civilization. To them, Cahokia was alive, thriving, and eternal. Each sunrise over the Mississippi brought another day of farming, crafting, praying, and playing. Each sunset cast long shadows over the mounds, reminding all who lived there of their connection to both earth and sky. Yet beneath the vibrant surface, challenges brewed. Population pressures strained the city's food supply. Construction projects demanded more labor. Social divisions deepened as elites consolidated power while ordinary citizens carried the weight of work and survival. Violence and unrest were not far from daily life, even if the rituals and feasts sought to mask them. Cahokia's daily life was a mixture of beauty and burden, joy and struggle. It was a place where ordinary people dreamed, worked, and raised families, even as they lived in the shadow of a system that demanded loyalty and labor. For nearly 2 centuries, they sustained the largest city of its kind, proving that the land now called America was home to complex, thriving societies long before European contact. But the rhythms of daily life could not protect Cahokia forever. The pressures mounting beneath the surface would soon boil over, bringing with them conflict, scarcity, and decline. The city that seemed eternal would soon begin to unravel, leaving behind only questions, mysteries, and the silent mounds that still rise above the earth today. Every civilization reaches a turning point, the moment when growth begins to strain its foundations. For nearly 2 centuries, Cahokia thrived as a sprawling city of tens of thousands, sustained by its fields, its trade networks, and its rituals. But sometime after 1200 AD, cracks began to appear. Archaeological evidence reveals signs of stress, conflict, and decline. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the great city of Cahokia fell silent. By 1350, its plazas were empty, its mounds abandoned, its people gone. What caused this collapse remains one of the greatest mysteries in North American history. The first signs of trouble can be seen in Cahokia's environment. The very success of the city placed immense pressure on the land around it. Supporting a population of 20,000 to 30,000 required vast amounts of food, firewood, and raw materials. Fields that once yielded bountiful harvests may have been overworked, their soils depleted. Forests surrounding the city were cut down for building and fuel, leading to deforestation. With fewer trees, the land became more vulnerable to flooding from the Mississippi River. Archaeological evidence suggests that major floods struck the region in the 1200s, inundating farmland and disrupting the city's lifeline. For a society so dependent on agriculture, these environmental challenges could have been devastating. But environmental stress was only one part of the story. Social tensions were rising inside the city itself. Cahokia's society was hierarchical, with elites enjoying privileges while ordinary citizens carried the burden of labor. During the city's peak, this system may have worked. Festivals, rituals, and shared traditions helped maintain unity. Yet as resources grew scarcer, inequalities became harder to ignore. Excavations of Cahokia's palisades, massive wooden walls that enclosed parts of the city, hint at unrest. These fortifications were not decorative, they were defensive structures. Their presence suggests that violence, whether from external enemies or internal conflict, was part of life in Cahokia's final century. Archaeologists have uncovered dramatic evidence of such conflict. One of the most striking examples comes from Mound 72, a burial site near the city's core. Here, excavators discovered the remains of a high-ranking man laid to rest with thousands of shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, a symbol of power. Around him were the remains of over 250 other individuals, many of them young women, buried in mass graves. Some appear to have been sacrificed, their lives offered to accompany the elite into the afterlife. Others showed signs of violent deaths. These burials reveal a society where power was both absolute and brutal, a society that used ritual violence to enforce order. But they may also hint at deeper fractures, the cost of maintaining authority in an era of mounting crisis. Beyond violence, Cahokia faced another invisible threat: disease. With tens of thousands living in close quarters, sanitation would have been a constant challenge. Human waste, animal remains, and crowded housing created fertile conditions for illness. While no written records remain, it is likely that outbreaks of disease swept through the city. Combined with food shortages and unrest, such epidemics could have further weakened Cahokia's resilience. By the 1200s, evidence shows that Cahokia's population was declining. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned. The great plazas, once filled with crowds for festivals and games, began to fall silent. Monk's Mound still stood tall, but the authority of those who ruled from its summit may have been crumbling. The construction of new mounds slowed, then ceased altogether. Where once the city expanded outward with energy and ambition, it now contracted inward, struggling to hold itself together. Why, then, did Cahokia collapse so completely? Historians and archaeologists debate this question fiercely, and no single answer has been proven. Instead, it seems likely that multiple forces converged. Environmental changes strained the food supply. Internal divisions undermined social unity. Floods and droughts disrupted agriculture. Violence and disease added to the chaos. Together, These pressures created a spiral of decline from which the city could not recover. Some theories go even further, suggesting that climate played a decisive role. The Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that began in the late medieval era, brought harsher winters and shorter growing seasons. For Cahokia, a society so dependent on farming, these changes may have tipped the balance between survival and collapse. Others argue that conflict with neighboring groups, perhaps resentful of Cahokia's dominance, contributed to its downfall. With resources dwindling, warfare may have erupted, turning the city's strength into a liability. What is striking is not just that Cahokia fell, but how completely it disappeared. By 1350, the city was abandoned. Unlike Rome, which left stone ruins to remind the world of its grandeur, Cahokia's monuments were made of earth. Over centuries, the mounds weathered, grass grew over them, and the city faded into the landscape. When Europeans arrived in the Mississippi Valley centuries later, they found the remnants of the mounds but had little understanding of the civilization that had built them. To many, the very idea that native peoples could have constructed such a city was dismissed. Instead, wild theories emerged, attributing the mounds to lost tribes of Israel or ancient Europeans, rather than to the ancestors of indigenous peoples who still lived nearby. Cahokia was not only abandoned, it was erased from the historical record. And yet, the mystery endures. Why would tens of thousands abandon a thriving city? Where did they go? Some archaeologists believe that Cahokia's people dispersed into smaller communities throughout the Mississippi Valley and beyond. Their descendants may have blended into other cultures, carrying with them fragments of Cahokia's traditions. Others suggest that famine, war, or disease reduced the population so drastically that the city simply could not sustain itself. But without written records, much of the story remains speculation. What we do know is that Cahokia's collapse was not the end of indigenous civilization in North America. Far from it. The people who built Cahokia were part of a larger tradition of mound-building cultures that stretched across the continent. Long after the city was abandoned, other communities continued to thrive, innovate, and adapt. The legacy of Cahokia lived on, even if the city itself lay silent. Today, the silence of Cahokia's collapse is one of its most haunting features. Standing atop Monk's Mound, it is hard to imagine the bustling city that once surrounded it. The plazas are empty, the wood hinges gone, the laughter of children and the drumbeats of ceremonies replaced by the sound of wind over grass. It is a place of ghosts, a reminder that even the mightiest cities can fall, leaving behind more questions than answers. The mystery of Cahokia's collapse continues to captivate archaeologists, historians, and visitors alike. Each excavation brings new clues: pollen samples that reveal ancient floods, skeletal remains that show signs of violence, artifacts that hint at far-reaching trade networks. But the full story may never be known. Cahokia stands as both a triumph and a warning, proof of what human societies can achieve, and a reminder of how fragile even the greatest civilizations can be. And yet, the most unsettling question remains unanswered. If Cahokia, the greatest city of its age in North America, could vanish so completely, what other civilizations might lie hidden beneath our feet, waiting to be rediscovered? Cahokia's collapse was dramatic, but perhaps even more astonishing is what came after: silence. Unlike Rome, Athens, or even the Maya cities of Central America, Cahokia left behind no written record, no chronicles of its rulers, no carved inscriptions to tell its story. And when European explorers and settlers entered the Mississippi Valley centuries later, they found only the weathered mounds rising from the ground. The greatest city in North America had not only fallen, it had been erased. The mounds puzzled early European settlers. Standing tall above the flat plains of Illinois, they looked unnatural, too carefully shaped to be accidents of the land. But instead of recognizing them as the achievements of indigenous peoples, many dismissed the possibility outright. In the 18th and 19th centuries, wild theories emerged about who had built them. Some claimed they were the work of a lost race, that had vanished before Native Americans arrived. Others suggested connections to ancient Europeans, Phoenicians, or even the lost tribes of Israel. These myths reflected a refusal to accept that indigenous people of North America could have created a city as large and complex as Cahokia. This erasure was not accidental, it was deliberate. To justify the colonization of the continent, European settlers needed to portray the land as empty, untamed, and awaiting civilization. Acknowledging Cahokia as a thriving indigenous city challenged that narrative. If native peoples had already built great cities, then the idea of Europeans bringing civilization collapsed. And so, Cahokia's true story was buried beneath layers of myth, denial, and silence. Even as archaeologists in the 19th century began to dig into the mounds, prejudice colored their interpretations. Early excavators were less interested in preserving history than in collecting artifacts. Many mounds were destroyed by careless digging or simply leveled to make room for farms and buildings. The site of Cahokia itself suffered badly. Monk's Mound, the largest of all, was partially cut into by roads and railways. Other mounds were plowed flat, their soil scattered. What had taken thousands of people generations to build was erased in decades of neglect. The name Cahokia itself is a reminder of how much has been lost. The word comes not from the city's original builders, but from a later group of native people, the Cahokia tribe, who lived in the area centuries after the city was abandoned. We don't even know what the people of Cahokia called themselves. Their language, their myths, their names for the mounds and plazas, all vanished, leaving behind only earth and fragments. Yet the erasure of Cahokia was not only physical, but intellectual. For centuries, history books written in the United States either ignored the city or mentioned it only in passing. School children learned about ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, but not about Cahokia, even though it once rivaled those civilizations in size and complexity. This absence shaped how generations of Americans thought about the land they lived on. To many, North America seemed like a wilderness waiting for progress, not a continent with its own great urban past. It wasn't until the 20th century that serious archaeological research began to recover Cahokia's story. Excavations revealed the scale of the city and the complexity of its society. Artifacts showed connections across the continent, proof of wide-ranging trade networks. Burial sites revealed a stratified society, with elites buried in splendor while others were sacrificed or buried in mass graves. Slowly, a picture emerged of Cahokia as a city that was not only real but extraordinary. And yet, even today, Cahokia remains largely absent from public memory. Millions of people drive past the site each year on highways leading into St. Louis, unaware that they are passing the remains of a city larger than medieval London. While Cahokia Mounds is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it lacks the global recognition of Machu Picchu or the Pyramids of Egypt. It is, in many ways, still hidden, not by time alone, but by the choices of those who wrote history. The erasure of Cahokia raises uncomfortable questions. How many other indigenous achievements were minimized or ignored? How much of history has been shaped by colonial perspectives that downplayed the accomplishments of native peoples? Cahokia's story forces us to confront not just the past, but the way the past has been told. Standing on Monk's Mound today, the view is striking. To the west, the skyline of St. Louis rises, dominated by the Gateway Arch, a monument to expansion and the opening of the American frontier. To the east, grassy fields stretch across what was once the heart of Cahokia. The contrast is stark. One city celebrated, the other nearly forgotten. Yet without Cahokia, the history of this land is incomplete. The silence surrounding Cahokia's erasure is perhaps its greatest mystery. Why did a city of such scale vanish not only from the land, but from memory? The answer lies partly in the biases of those who came later, but perhaps also in the fragility of memory itself. Without writing, without stone monuments, Cahokia's story depended on oral traditions, and those traditions may have been scattered as its people dispersed. What survived was not enough to compete with the written narratives of European settlers. But silence is not the same as absence. The mounds still rise above the Illinois prairie, quiet but enduring. They are reminders that Cahokia was real, that its people were innovators, builders, and dreamers. And they are warnings, too. Proof that even the greatest cities can be erased not only by collapse, but by forgetting. And that leads to a haunting question. If Cahokia, the largest city of its time, could be buried by both earth and history, what other civilizations, stories, and truths have we lost? Not because they disappeared, but because someone decided not to remember them? Cahokia's story should have ended with ruins. A great city rises, thrives, and falls, the cycle of civilizations. But here, the ending feels different. Too quiet, too incomplete, almost as if someone closed the book before the final chapter was written. We know the outlines, the rise, the golden age, the collapse, the erasure. But what we don't know, what we still can't explain, are the gaps, the missing pieces, the questions that refuse to stay buried. Why did tens of thousands abandon one of the greatest cities in the world? Was it famine, war, disease, or something else entirely? Something no archaeologist has yet uncovered? Why did the memory of Cahokia vanish so completely when stories of other indigenous civilizations endured? Was it lost naturally or deliberately silenced? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what else lies hidden beneath our feet? Archaeologists admit that most of Cahokia remains untouched. Modern highways cut through ancient neighborhoods. Suburbs sit atop what were once ceremonial plazas. Entire sections of the city have been destroyed without study. For every mound we've examined, how many have been erased forever? For every artifact recovered, how many lie crushed under concrete? Yet still, mysteries rise to the surface. A carved stone effigy buried deep inside a mound. A skeleton with signs of violent ritual. A wooden circle aligned perfectly with the solstices, rebuilt generation after generation. Each discovery suggests a story far more complex than we realize. A story that slips away the moment we think we understand it. And that's the strange power of Cahokia. It refuses to be complete. It refuses to give us all the answers. Instead, it stands as a reminder that history is not fixed, but fragile. That entire civilizations can be erased not by time, but by silence. Standing atop Monk's Mound today, looking out at the modern skyline of St. Louis, you can feel the weight of that silence. Beneath the grass, beneath the highways and parking lots, an entire city waits. And with it, questions we are not yet ready to answer. Because if Cahokia, the largest city of its age, could vanish so completely from memory, what does that mean for us today? What cities, what cultures, what truths might our own time leave buried for the future to puzzle over? The story of Cahokia is not finished. Maybe it never will be. And that's the real mystery. Not just the fall of a city, but the fall of memory itself. And so, the question lingers. What else has history erased that we haven't yet uncovered? Cahokia is more than history. It is a warning, a question, and a silence that still echoes across the Mississippi Valley. 1,000 years ago, tens of thousands of people built a city greater than London. Today, most of us don't even know its name. Its mounds still rise from the earth, quiet but defiant. Proof that greatness once stood here. Proof that history can vanish if we let it. And proof that what we remember depends on what we choose not to forget. But Cahokia leaves us with more than ruins. It leaves us with a riddle. How can the greatest city of its time vanish so completely? Who decides what survives in our memory and what is erased? And if Cahokia could disappear once, what else lies hidden, waiting for us to uncover it? The silence of Cahokia is not an ending. It's an invitation to look deeper, to question the stories we've been told, to wonder what else history has buried, just out of reach. Because the truth is simple. Cahokia is not just a lost city. It is a reminder that what has been forgotten may still be out there. And the question remains, are we ready to find it?